I was 25 years old and just recently married and living in California. And then something happened that took a whole turn of my life that I didn't expect.
Homicide investigators are currently working at least 9 murders occurring over the past 2 years involving prominent Cuban exiles in South Florida. Though many of the victims were believed to be targets of politically motivated assassinations,
that was the assassination of my father in Miami. My mom and my brother and I and our family, we went for his funeral in Florida. And I had not seen my dad for 14 years, since I was 11 years old. I really did not know anything about him or what he left. All I knew was the stories from my mom that we had a privileged childhood and that he was a prominent politician in Cuba, and that was it. And we went there. It was sort of like a very chaotic scene at the whole funeral. Those whole slew of people and photographers and police, and it was a very big deal. The newspapers was plastered with his assassination. He was the 4th former Cuban politician to be assassinated in Miami. And there was a little piece of something that was kind of interesting. In his possession, the only thing that they had was this, which was a dollar cut in half. And the police said that they felt that he had this as identification for someone that he was supposed to be meeting. The other person would have the other one, so that they knew that they were the ones supposed to meet. I was sort of fascinated. What in the world was going on? Why was he assassinated? What was he involved in? What was going on? And that started the process of thinking about him and trying to find the story about his life. Little did I know in doing that he would lead me in a path of self-discovery in learning about not just about him, but about my family and my own childhood that I had long since repressed. I was about 2 years old. We would have been in Havana, Cuba, in the community of Miramar. At that time, my dad was a prominent Cuban politician, Jesus Gonzalez-Cartas. He was the leader of a political group called the Revolutionary Action of Guterres. He was a labor minister and an advisor to the president at that time. That's a picture that is right before there was a military coup that deposed the elected president of Cuba and replaced it with a dictator called Fulgencio Batista. As a 25-year-old, and I had throughout my life certain nightmares. And one of these nightmares, I'm in my bed, and it's at night, and there's a noise going on in the house, and I can hear banging and clanking and screaming, and my nanny bursts through the door, and I'm jumping up in my bed, and I'm all excited, and my nanny comes over and tries to get me dressed, and I'm still jumping up and down, and she slapped me, which kind of startled me because my nanny had never done that before. And as she did that, some police burst into the room, and they had guns, and the police were smashing things and trashing the place, and they were looking for my dad. And my dream didn't have all those details. That kind of resurfaced after a while. Later, I told my mom about the dream that I was having, and she told me that was a true story, something that had really happened. It was at the time that, shortly after this picture, when Fulgencio Batista had taken over, the police were raiding the house looking for my father. On the plane, as we were going to his funeral in Miami, and as we were flying and I was thinking about things, I kind of started remembering that, and it was a nightmare also that was having, and it kind of clarified in my mind as we were flying. Part of it was we were at a political function, a banquet, and I was very, very young, but you're still supposed to sit perfectly straight, don't move, don't think, don't even look around. Not supposed to look around, but I still did. My dad stood up to speak, and there was a chaos and the shouts, and a man stood up and he took a gun out and he fired a shot and hit my dad on the shoulder. People scrambled around trying to hide. Some people kind of grabbed him. The table went tumbling down. They took him away. My dad got in wrapped up tissue or something, I don't know what, around his arm, and stood up back into the podium and continued with his speech. Throughout the whole thing, my mom didn't get up. She didn't move. My brother did the same thing. I tried to do the same thing, but I kind of whimpered a teeny little bit. I didn't cry, I did whimper kind of a little bit. My brother, under the table, couldn't see it because of the cloth, just kind of went and kicked me under the table to get back in control, which I did. And after the finish, my dad finished, we went out, go back home, total silence. We get into the house, and the servants come over, and my nanny comes over, and my dad just shoos them away and sends them away and closes it. And he just blasted me. How dare I? How dare I embarrass him in public that day and cry? He would rather have died than to see me cry in public, his son cry in public. And then he stormed off, didn't say anything, he stormed off, and my brother did the same, scowling at me, and my mom kind of lost her cool. Normally she was very cool, unemotional, and she just lambasted me with my horrible, horrendous behavior in public, and she stormed off and into her room and sent me back to my room. I learned my lesson that day, where it says, you don't cry, you don't show emotion, you hide everything, and you hide it so well that you even hide it from yourself so that no one can see it. As Batista's regime continued and my dad was off fighting, trying to overthrow, and my parents were divorced, our standard of living changed and we had to move from our mansion that we lived in to a smaller, more suburban type of setting. Later on, as I'm about 9 years old, another political change occurred when Fidel Castro overthrew the regime of Batista and established a communist dictatorship. Everything that we owned was confiscated. The schools were closed down and no more private schools, just the state schools. They took all our books away and replaced them with new books that were not imperialistic propaganda books, as they called it, and to re-educate the people on the true nature of society as they saw it from a communist perspective. And one of that was the propaganda of a classless society. And as part of that, one of the teachers in the school had me stand up as an example of the former regime that profited from the exploit of the peasants of the country, from the people, and how terrible my father had been and crimes that he had alleged to have committed against the people, and continue on about how horrible I was and how their job was to re-educate them and to turn them into true patriotic citizens, which I think I probably would have cried, except I had long since learned you don't cry. Things got progressively worse. There were shortages of food, and the Cuban embargo started. Everything was collapsing, and at the time, many people were starting to leave, especially sometimes they couldn't leave the country. So what they did is they would send their children out.
December 1960. A secret network of volunteers risked their lives to evacuate children, and not just the children of the underground.
They would get names from priests and nuns and friends of children whose parents wanted them to leave the country.
At that point, my dad was away, my mom was there, things were really getting bad, and so she decided to go ahead and send my brother and me off to the U.S. without her. We were not allowed to leave with anything. In fact, going out of the country, before you could go out, you had to go through an inspection, make sure you were not taking anything, and they strip you naked to search everything. And I had my little crucifix from my first communion that I wore. And it says, eres un gusano, which means you are a worm, and you're not allowed to take that. And so they ripped it off, and so the only thing we were allowed to have, we had a tiny little suitcase with one change of clothes, and that was it. So we arrived in the U.S. with nothing, no change of clothes, can't speak the language. We had family here in the United States. We had an aunt that we could stay with. That first few months was fine. When I came in, I was in 5th grade. And it was okay because my teacher was really nice in elementary school, and she was very sweet, and so she helped me through a little bit. But that was only a few months before we went on summer break that went into junior high, and that was horrible. My brother's in his own school, so he's not around. My protector was not around, and it was totally different. It was just really scary. You don't know anything. You don't know the language. You can't read your schedule. You don't know where you are. And especially for, think of this mass exodus of foreigners coming into Miami. So you get widespread discrimination against all these foreigners. And so I remember being teased, made fun of, joked, called names. It was horrible. I remember the bigotry in Miami at the time period. And for example, a sign that I remember seeing in Miami when going from school home, and it has a sign for apartment for rent. And it said, for rent, no children, no pets, no Cubans. It was worse than the revolution and the guns and the violence in there. That was much more personal.
To boldly go where no man has gone before.
I became a total Star Trek fan, and part of the fascination for me with that show was the character Spock. And Spock was a Vulcan whose philosophy in his culture of nonviolence and of total analytical thinking and the denial and suppression of all emotion in order to be totally logical. I think because of all the things I was going through, my own rejection or attempting to block out all my emotions of my past, I could relate it to that character of being able to block all his emotions in order to be totally logical and analytical, as I was striving to be. In that period that I'm going through, which would be in my teenage periods, just as I tried to become totally unemotional, analytical, forget and put away my Cuban history, my Cuban culture, my Cuban background. Part of the process was, except for my mom and her cooking, would have been no Cuban food, no Cuban music, no Cuban dancing. A transition from Cuban to American, and to become an American and forget the whole background and history. But of course I didn't realize, although I fell in love with the show, and I still am in love with the show, is that the main part of the whole show also is, even though he attempts to block all emotion, he's incapable of doing so, and which causes a lot of tension in his life. And I can see the relationship now.
Mother, how can you have lived on Vulcan so long, married a Vulcan, raised a son on Vulcan, without understanding what it means to be a Vulcan?
Well, if this is what it means, I don't want to know.
If means to adopt a philosophy, a way of life which is logical and beneficial. We cannot disregard that philosophy merely for personal gain.
Throughout college, I was definitely that way, and as I got married. Part of going through the book and writing of Childhood Forgotten, I was able to see and relate to the character and how the repression of my memories would only cause problems and not solve the issue. I used to have tremendous appendix problems. I thought I had appendicitis because I had pain in my, so go to the doctor. No, you don't have appendicitis. Then the pain would disappear once the doctor says, no, you don't have this. Then I would start getting a rash on my hands, on both hands, and put creams on it, nothing. So go to the doctor. No, it's just stress. The moment I said, no, there's nothing physically wrong with me, then it would disappear. Then I would get migraine. So it's a series of body reactions and pains and aches having to do with my own repression and my body trying to fight that. So that's kind of a struggle. I don't get them anymore. I still bite my nails though.
These days, what's your relationship with Cuba? Do you ever feel like one day you would like to go back?
I would love to go back. Unfortunately, until there's change in the country, I don't think it would be wise for me. It's still, unfortunately, some of the culture in some of the Latin American countries of the sins of the father until the second and the third generation. And I'm the second generation, so I would much rather not risk going and find somebody who's still alive who still hates my father.